The radio crackled with a voice no one recognized. "Ghost 7, this is Nightingale. I have eyes on your position." The SEAL team commander, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hammer Rodriguez, pressed himself against the compound wall in eastern Afghanistan, confusion etching across his weathered face. Nightingale wasn't any call sign in their operation. His team was pinned down, 3 wounded, ammunition running low, and now some unknown operator was breaking radio protocol. "Nightingale, identify yourself and get off this frequency," he barked, ducking as another burst of PKM fire chewed into the mud brick above his head. The response came calm, almost amused. "Copy that, Ghost 7. I'm the medevac pilot you boys called just a medic at the FOB yesterday. Currently 5 clicks out in a bird that wasn't supposed to fly combat ops. But seeing as you're about to be overrun, I'm thinking we should discuss options." Rodriguez remembered her now, Captain Melody Nightingale Reeves, the medical evacuation pilot who tried to brief them on alternative extraction routes. His team had barely acknowledged her, too focused on their high-speed gear and Tier 1 status to listen to some dust-off pilot's suggestions. The irony tasted bitter as another RPG screamed overhead. Reeves had been flying medevac for 3 years, but her story started long before that. Growing up in rural Montana, she'd learned to fly in her grandfather's crop duster before she could legally drive. The old man, a Korean War veteran, had taught her that the sky didn't care about your gender, only your skill. She joined the Army at 18, went through flight school at Fort Rucker, and earned her wings with distinction. But in the military aviation community, especially around special operations, she was always just the medevac pilot. The warriors went in hot. She came in after, picking up the pieces. That designation had never bothered her until today. Today, monitoring the emergency frequencies from her scheduled maintenance flight, she'd heard Ghost 7's desperate calls for immediate extraction. The quick reaction force was 30 minutes out. The AC-130 gunship had been diverted to another troops-in-contact situation. Rodriguez's team had minutes, not half hours. She'd made a command decision that would either end her career or save 7 lives. "Ghost 7, Nightingale. I'm seeing approximately 40 fighters converging on your position from 3 sides. Your southern exit route is compromised. Those hills you're using for cover are about to become your tomb." Her voice carried no panic, just clinical observation. Rodriguez could hear the turbine whine of her U-60 Black Hawk in the background. She wasn't supposed to be here. Medical evacuation birds flew with red crosses, internationally recognized symbols of non-combatant status. But Reeves had made her choice the moment she'd heard Americans dying on the radio. "Nightingale, this is a hot LZ. We're taking heavy fire from fortified positions. This isn't a medevac scenario." Rodriguez's protest sounded hollow even to himself. They both knew what she was really doing, risking everything to save men who dismissed her 24 hours ago. The Black Hawk's crew chief, Sergeant First Class Anthony Torres, had been flying with Reeves for 18 months. When she'd suddenly banked hard toward the mountains instead of returning to base, he hadn't questioned it. He'd simply checked his M240 machine gun and told the flight medic to prep for casualties. Torres had seen Reeves thread her bird through mountain passes that would make Apache pilots nervous, land in hot zones that others deemed impossible, and maintain perfect calm while rockets exploded around them. The morning before, he'd watched the SEALs brush past her at the Tactical Operations Center, treating her like furniture while she tried to provide critical terrain analysis. He'd seen the flash of frustration in her eyes, quickly suppressed. Now monitoring the tactical frequency, he understood her decision. This wasn't about ego or proving a point. This was about bringing everyone home. "Ma'am, we're really doing this?" he asked over the internal comms. Her response was to push the cyclic forward, dropping the Black Hawk into a terrain-hugging flight profile that would mask their approach. "Torres, when we hit that LZ, I need maximum suppression on the eastern ridge. They've got a DSHK up there that's going to try to punch through our armor." "Nightingale Ghost 7, be advised we have wounded that can't move fast. My corpsman is down and I've got 2 operators who can't walk." Rodriguez's admission cost him. SEALs didn't like admitting vulnerability, especially not to someone they'd marginalized. But pride meant nothing when your brothers were bleeding out in Afghan dirt. Reeves processed the information instantly. Copy, Ghost 7. I'm coming in from the northwest, using that ridgeline to mask my approach. When you hear my rotors, I need you to pop smoke and prepare for immediate dust-off. We'll have about 15 seconds on the ground. The plan was insane. A lone Black Hawk, without Apache escort, diving into a Taliban stronghold to extract a surrounded team. In the aviation community, they had a term for this kind of flying: heroic stupidity. But Reeves had studied the terrain, memorized every ridge and valley during her 3 years of flying these mountains. She knew something the Taliban didn't. There was a narrow canyon approach that would put her in the enemy's blind spot for exactly 43 seconds. It would be enough, or they'd all die trying. Master Sergeant Jake Frost Williams, the team's senior NCO, was applying pressure to a wounded teammate's femoral artery when he heard the distinctive thump of rotor blades. He'd been in enough combat zones to recognize different aircraft by sound alone. This wasn't the aggressive chop of an Apache or the heavy beat of a Chinook. This was a single Black Hawk coming in fast and low. Too fast, too low. Jesus Christ, she's actually doing it, he muttered, watching the dark shape materialize from behind the northern ridge. The Taliban fighters heard it too, their fire shifting toward the new threat, but Reeves had timed it perfectly. The sun was behind her, blinding the eastern gun positions. She'd waited for this exact moment when the afternoon glare would give her precious seconds of advantage. The Black Hawk dropped into the compound like a falling stone, flaring at the last possible second. The rotor wash created an instant dust storm, providing additional concealment. Tor's machine gun opened up immediately, disciplined bursts walking across the eastern ridge where muzzle flashes betrayed enemy positions. Move, 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 Reeves's voice cut through the chaos on the radio. She couldn't see the team through the dust cloud, but she could feel the weight shift as they loaded wounded. Every second on the ground exponentially increased the chances of a rocket-propelled grenade finding its mark. The aircraft shuddered as rounds impacted the armored plating. A warning light flashed on her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping. She'd deal with that later. Rodriguez was the last one on, literally diving through the crew door as Reeves pulled pitch. The Black Hawk clawed for altitude, turbines screaming at maximum power. An RPG contrail passed so close that Tors could feel its heat. Then they were up over the ridge, using terrain to break line of sight with enemy positions. But they weren't clear yet. The Taliban had vehicles, and they knew where the Americans would have to go. The 40-minute flight back to Bagram would be a running gunfight. Reeves keyed her radio, switching to the operations center's frequency. Bagram Control, Nightingale. I'm RTB with 7 souls on board, 3 urgent surgical. Request immediate trauma team standing by. The operations center at Bagram erupted in confusion. Flight tracking showed Nightingale's aircraft was supposed to be in maintenance. Colonel Sandra Hayes, the aviation brigade commander, grabbed the radio personally. Nightingale, this is Mustang 6. Captain Reeves, what the hell are you doing? The response came through steady despite the sound of impacts on the airframe. Mustang 6 Nightingale, executing emergency extraction of troops in contact. Currently taking fire, dealing with partial hydraulic failure but maintaining controlled flight. Request you clear all traffic from approach corridor. Hayes could hear the strain now, the subtle tension that meant Reeves was fighting her wounded bird through the mountains. In the background, she could make out voices, the SEALs working on their wounded, calling out medical procedures. Hayes had been in Reeves's position once, 20 years ago in Iraq. She'd made the same choice, paid the same price. Nightingale, Mustang 6. You're cleared for immediate approach, any runway, crash and rescue standing by. The unspoken message was clear. Land however you can, we'll sort out the paperwork later. In the back of the Black Hawk, Rodriguez worked alongside the flight medic to stabilize his wounded operators. His hands, steady despite the aircraft's violent evasive maneuvers, applied tourniquets and pressure bandages with practiced efficiency. He'd been in hundreds of firefights, led dozens of direct action missions, but this was different. They were passengers now, their fate entirely in the hands of the pilot they'd dismissed. Through the crew door's window, he could see Taliban vehicles racing along the valley road, fighters in the truck beds firing AK-47 skyward. Reeves was flying nap of the earth, using every terrain feature to break line of sight. The aircraft would suddenly bank hard, disappear behind a ridge, then pop up miles away from where the enemy expected. It was virtuoso flying, the kind that couldn't be taught, only learned through thousands of hours in these specific mountains. Ghost 7, Nightingale. How are you wounded? Her voice cut through his observations. Even while fighting a damaged aircraft through hostile airspace, she was thinking about the medical priorities. Nightingale, we've got one critical chest wound, one femoral bleed controlled but needing surgery fast, and one with probable internal bleeding, Rodriguez reported, medical terminology feeling strange in his mouth. He was used to calling in airstrikes, not medical evacuations. Copy that, Ghost 7. I'm shaving 6 minutes off our flight time, but it's going to get sporty. Sporty was pilot speak for dangerous. Before Rodriguez could respond, the Black Hawk suddenly pitched nose down, diving toward a canyon that looked far too narrow for the rotor diameter. He heard Torres on the internal comm. "Ma'am, that's threading the needle awful tight." Reeves's response was calm. "Trust me, Torres. I've run this canyon before." She had, though never with hydraulic problems and battle damage. She discovered this shortcut during a weather diversion 6 months ago, filing it away in her mental map of the area. The canyon walls flashed by in a blur of tan and brown, so close that Rodriguez could see individual rocks. The Taliban couldn't follow here. Their vehicles were stuck on the valley road, and the canyon walls prevented effective fire from above. The hydraulic warning light had progressed from amber to red. Reeves could feel the growing resistance in the controls, the slight delay between input and response that meant the backup systems were struggling. In a classroom at Fort Rucker, they'd call this a mandatory landing situation. But classrooms didn't have dying soldiers in the back. She pressed on, compensating for the degrading handling with micro-adjustments that had become instinct. Torres, watching his pilot work, keyed the internal comm. "Ma'am, if we make it back, remind me to apologize for every time I complained about your aggressive flying during training." A slight smile crossed Reeves's face, though her eyes never left the terrain rushing toward them. "When we make it back, Torres." "When?" The crew chief understood the distinction. Reeves didn't deal in possibilities when lives were on the line. She dealt in certainties, even if she had to will them into existence through sheer determination and skill. 10 minutes out from Bagram, they picked up their Apache escort, 2 gunships that had been scrambled when the operations center understood what was happening. The Apache pilots, monitoring the emergency frequency, had heard everything. Major Thomas, Vandal Mitchell, leading the escort, had flown with Reeves before. He'd always respected her technical skills, but this was something beyond that. This was the kind of flying that became legend, the sort they'd teach at aviation school, if anyone believed it had actually happened. "Nightingale, Vandal 1, we've got you covered. Hell of a piece of flying, Captain." His acknowledgement meant something. Apache pilots were the apex predators of Army aviation, and they didn't hand out compliments lightly. "Appreciate the escort, Vandal," Reeves replied, her voice betraying the first hints of exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the extraction was wearing off, and the physical demands of fighting the damaged controls were taking their toll. "Just get us home." The landing at Bagram would later be described by the tower controllers as controlled crash arrival. Reeves brought the Black Hawk in hot, hydraulics finally failing completely on short final. She had to use emergency procedures, differential engine power and pure muscle to keep the bird level. The landing was hard enough to blow both main tires, the aircraft sliding to a stop in a shower of sparks and smoke. But they were down. They were alive. Medical teams swarmed the aircraft before the rotors stopped turning. The wounded SEALs were extracted with professional efficiency, rushed to the waiting surgical teams. Rodriguez was the last to leave, pausing at the pilot's door. Reeves was still in her seat, hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline finally released its grip. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat, and he could see the strain in her shoulders from fighting the controls. "Captain," he started, but she held up a hand. "Save it for after the debrief, Ghost 7. Your men need you at the hospital." It wasn't a dismissal, it was a priority check. Even now, she was thinking about his team first. The debrief would come 3 hours later, after the wounded were stabilized, after Reeves had completed her mandatory post-incident paperwork, after the maintenance crews had counted 43 bullet holes in her aircraft. Colonel Hayes presided personally, the conference room packed with officers from both Special Operations and Aviation Commands. The flight data recorder told a story that seemed impossible, angles of bank that exceeded aircraft limitations, power settings that should have caused engine failure, G-forces that pushed human endurance. But the black box never lied. Reeves sat quietly through the technical discussion, answering questions with professional detachment. When asked why she'd risked her career and life for a team that wasn't her responsibility, she simply said, "They were Americans in trouble. The rest is just details." Rodriguez, freshly showered but still wearing his blood-stained combat uniform, stood up. "Ma'am, with respect, it's not just details. My team is alive because Captain Reeves did what no one else could or would do. We ignored her expertise yesterday because of our own arrogance. She saved us anyway. That's not just heroism, that's character." The room fell silent. In the special operations community, respect was earned in blood and measured in lives saved. Rodriguez's words carried weight that no medal or commendation could match. Hayes looked at Reeves, seeing echoes of her younger self, a female aviator constantly having to prove herself in a male-dominated field, always held to a higher standard, never quite fitting the warrior archetype despite repeatedly demonstrating warrior virtues. "Captain Reeves, you violated numerous regulations, flew an unauthorized combat mission, and destroyed a $6 million aircraft," Hayes said formally. Then her tone shifted. "You also saved 7 American lives and demonstrated the finest traditions of Army aviation. I'll handle the paperwork. You handle the recovery. Dismissed." As the room cleared, Rodriguez approached Reeves one more time. "That call sign, Nightingale." Florence Nightingale was just a nurse until she revolutionized battlefield medicine. "You were just a medic until today." Reeves finally smiled. "Still am a medic, Ghost 7, just one who happens to fly." The aftermath rippled through the special operations community like a stone dropped in still water. Within days, the story had spread through every team room from Fort Bragg to Virginia Beach. The helmet camera footage from one of the SEALs, showing the Black Hawk materializing through the dust storm like some avenging angel, became required viewing at the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. But for Reeves, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. She was back flying medevac within a week, once maintenance cleared a replacement aircraft. The difference was in the small things. The special operators who had once walked past her now stopped to talk, really talk, about terrain and tactics. They started attending her route briefings, taking notes when she pointed out dead zones and ambush points. The respect was quiet but profound. Torres noticed it first, the way conversation stopped when Reeves entered the Tactical Operations Center, not from dismissal but from attention. The way young warrant officers sought her advice on mountain flying techniques. The way even the Apache pilots started asking her opinion on approach routes. 3 weeks after the extraction, Reeves was prepping for another routine medevac mission when Rodriguez appeared at her aircraft. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth, his team flanking him in their full kit. "Captain Reeves," he said formally, "Ghost Team has a tradition. When someone saves our lives, they become part of our story. We'd like you to have this." He unwrapped a subdued American flag, the kind special operations units carried on missions. It was weathered, stained with Afghan dust and what might have been blood. Every member of his team had signed it. At the bottom, in Rodriguez's precise handwriting, "To Nightingale, who reminded us that warriors come in all forms." Reeves took the flag carefully, understanding its significance. These men didn't give out mementos lightly. "I'm honored," she said simply, "but I need you to know something. I didn't do it to prove a point or earn anyone's respect. I did it because," Rodriguez interrupted gently, "because it needed doing. We know that's what makes it matter." 6 months later, Reeves was rotating home, her deployment complete. The change of command ceremony was standard military pageantry, except for the audience. Mixed among the aviation personnel were operators from every special operations unit on base: SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, even a few Delta operators who officially didn't exist. They stood in the back, unauthorized but unchallenged. As Reeves passed the unit colors to her successor, Rodriguez's team snapped to attention, rendering a salute that wasn't required by protocol but demanded by respect. Later, at the informal gathering, she found herself surrounded by warriors who wanted to hear her story, her perspective, her lessons learned. The narrative had shifted. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was Nightingale, the pilot who dove into hell because Americans needed her. A young female warrant officer fresh from flight school approached nervously. "Ma'am, how do you make them see you're more than just support?" Reeves considered the question, remembering her own struggles, her own moments of doubt. "You don't make them see anything," she finally answered. "You just do your job to the absolute best of your ability. You study harder, fly better, and care more about the mission than anyone else. And when the moment comes, because it always does, you act without hesitation. The rest sorts itself out." The Barrett .50 caliber rifle had been a late addition to the story, though it became the most legendary part. 3 months after the extraction, Rodriguez's team had been in another firefight, this time with Reeves deliberately assigned as their dedicated air support. When they needed precision fire on a fortified position beyond their small arms range, Rodriguez had made an unprecedented call. "Nightingale, Ghost 7, if I could get a rifle to you, could you make the shot?" The request was absurd, asking a pilot to become a sniper while flying. But Reeves had grown up in Montana, where long-range shooting was a survival skill. "Send it up," she'd replied. Using the crew chief's harness, she'd stabilized herself in the Black Hawk's door while Torres held the aircraft in a perfect hover, itself an act of incredible flying. The shot, 1,100 meters through mountain wind, had eliminated the threat. The image of Rodriguez passing his personal Barrett to a crew chief, who then handed it to Reeves, became iconic. It represented the ultimate trust, the final dissolution of barriers between operator and support, between warrior and healer. The fact that she'd made the shot, one-handed while calling corrections to her co-pilot, only added to the legend. But legends, Reeves knew, were dangerous things. They created expectations that no human could consistently meet. Young pilots would try to emulate her actions without understanding the years of preparation that made them possible. So she started teaching, really teaching, turning her experiences into lessons that could save lives. She developed new training protocols for combat medical evacuation, incorporating lessons learned from special operations. She pushed for better integration between aviation and ground units, breaking down the institutional barriers that had nearly cost American lives. The Army noticed. The flight that had started as a court-martial offense became a case study at the Command and General Staff College. Reeves found herself briefing generals, explaining not just what she'd done, but why the system had failed to utilize her expertise initially. It was uncomfortable, challenging institutional prejudices, but necessary. Change in military culture came slowly, but it came. The final testament to her impact came 2 years later. Reeves, now a major, was attending a joint forces conference when she heard familiar voices. Rodriguez's team, now training the next generation of special operators, had brought their students to hear her speak. As she took the podium, looking out at a room full of young faces, male and female, aviators and operators, she saw the future of American military power. They weren't divided by branch or specialty, by gender or background. They were united by purpose, by the understanding that everyone brought essential skills to the fight. "The battlefield doesn't care about your insignia," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been tested and proven. It doesn't care about your gender, your branch, or your specialty. It only cares about your competence, your courage, and your commitment to the person next to you. The moment we forget that, the moment we let prejudice override capability, Americans die. She told the story then, not as hero worship but as education. Every decision point, every tactical consideration, every moment where preparation met opportunity. She explained how years of dismissed suggestions had actually been reconnaissance, building a mental map that saved lives when seconds mattered. She talked about tours, whose steady flying had made her shot possible, about the flight medic who'd kept 3 men alive through controlled crashes and emergency procedures, about Rodriguez, whose humility in admitting his team's vulnerability had enabled their rescue. None of us saved those men alone, she said. We saved them together once we got past the artificial barriers we'd created. The room was silent, absorbing the lesson. In the back, Rodriguez nodded slowly. This was why they'd come, why they'd brought their students. Not to hear war stories, but to understand that warfare was evolving, that the future belonged to those who could integrate every capability, regardless of its source. The ceremony happened without warning. Reeves was conducting a routine briefing at Fort Campbell when General Patricia Morrison, the first female commander of Joint Special Operations Command, entered the room. Everyone snapped to attention, but Morrison waved them down. Major Reeves, I'll keep this brief. The actions you took in Afghanistan, particularly the integration protocols you've developed since, have revolutionized how we conduct combat rescue operations. Your willingness to challenge institutional blindness has saved dozens of lives. It's my privilege to present you with the Distinguished Flying Cross. The medal itself was less important than what it represented, institutional acknowledgement that the old ways of thinking were obsolete. As Morrison pinned the medal to Reeves's uniform, she whispered, "You've opened doors that were sealed for decades. Don't stop pushing." The applause that followed wasn't military courtesy. It was genuine respect from peers who understood the battles Reeves had fought, both in the air and in conference rooms. But the most meaningful recognition came in quiet moments. The emails from young female pilots who'd found inspiration in her story. The special operators who now actively sought out aerial reconnaissance from medevac pilots, recognizing their unique perspective. The changes in training doctrine that emphasized integration over separation. Reeves kept flying, kept teaching, kept pushing boundaries. She turned down a Pentagon position to stay in the cockpit, knowing that real change happened at the operational level. Her call sign evolved from identifier to inspiration. Nightingale became shorthand for the kind of leader who put mission over ego, competence over convention. Flight students studied her missions not just for tactical lessons, but for leadership principles. The Barrett shot became secondary to the decision-making that preceded it, the willingness to act despite institutional risk, the preparation that made seemingly impossible actions achievable. Years later, at her retirement ceremony, the crowd defied protocol. Artillery officers stood next to Navy SEALs. Maintenance crews mingled with Tier 1 operators. Female pilots from every branch had traveled on their own dime to attend. Rodriguez, now a command sergeant major, served as the unofficial host, telling stories that had become legend but remained grounded in truth. Major Reeves taught us that capability isn't determined by your badge or your background, he said during his remarks. She showed us that the medic might be the warrior you need, that the support element might have the critical insight, that respect earned through competence transcends any artificial hierarchy we create. He paused, looking directly at Reeves. She reminded us that in combat, there's no such thing as just anything. There are only Americans trying to bring other Americans home. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but Reeves barely noticed. She was thinking about the young captain who'd approached her earlier, helicopter pilot, wings fresh on her chest, asking for advice about her first deployment. The cycle continued. The legacy manifested in concrete changes. The Army Aviation Center incorporated Reeves's experiences into their doctrine, creating new courses on tactical integration. Special operations units began requiring their operators to attend aviation briefings, recognizing that pilots' terrain knowledge could be mission-critical. The artificial barriers between combat and support specialties began to erode, replaced by a recognition that modern warfare required every capability. Female aviators found doors opening that had been subtly closed, their expertise sought rather than tolerated. The Barrett shot became a training scenario at sniper school, not for its tactical value, but for its lesson about unconventional solutions. Young officers learned that sometimes the best shooter might be the pilot, the best tactical mind might be the medic, the critical capability might come from the most unexpected source. The story spread beyond military circles, inspiring changes in civilian emergency services, corporate leadership programs, anywhere that artificial hierarchies prevented optimal performance. The final chapter came quietly. Reeves, teaching at the Army War College, received a package with no return address. Inside was a weathered notebook, Rodriguez's mission log from that day in Afghanistan. He'd annotated it over the years, adding perspectives from each team member, creating a complete picture of how one person's courage had rippled outward. The last entry, dated recently, simply read, "Nightingale, you didn't just save 7 lives that day. You changed how we think about saving lives." Every integrated operation, every barrier broken, every young officer who sees possibility instead of limitation, that's your real legacy. Not the medal, not the shot, but the transformation. From all of us who learned to listen, thank you. Reeves closed the notebook carefully, understanding that this was the real measure of impact, not in moments of dramatic heroism, but in sustained institutional change. Not in being recognized as exceptional, but in making the exceptional become expected. She thought about that day often, not with pride but with purpose. Every flight, every mission, every training evolution had led to that moment when preparation met opportunity. The Taliban fighters who'd thought they had ghost team trapped hadn't accounted for a medical evacuation pilot who'd spent 3 years memorizing every ridge and valley. Rodriguez's team hadn't known that the pilot they dismissed had been the Montana state champion in long-range rifle competition before joining the Army. The system hadn't recognized that competence came in forms that didn't match traditional templates, but under pressure, when lives hung in the balance, truth emerged. The medic became the warrior because she'd always been both. The system just hadn't had eyes to see it. Now, standing before a new generation of officers, Reeves carried that truth forward. "You are never just anything," she told them. "You are a repository of capabilities that combat will reveal. Your job is to be ready when that moment comes, to act without hesitation, and to never let artificial limitations define real possibilities." The rifle itself, Rodriguez's Barrett .50 caliber, now resided in the Special Operations Museum. The placard beneath it didn't focus on the weapon but on what it represented. On March 15, 2018, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez passed this rifle to Major Melody Nightingale Reeves, U.S. Army, while she flew in support of his embattled team. The exchange symbolized the dissolution of traditional military boundaries and the recognition that in combat, competence transcends convention. The single shot fired from this weapon, while remarkable, pales in significance to the trust it represented and the institutional changes it inspired. Visitors often missed the deeper meaning, focusing on the dramatic shot rather than the years of preparation and prejudice that preceded it. But those who understood, the operators and aviators, the medics and mechanics, they saw the truth. This wasn't just a rifle, it was a bridge between worlds that had been unnecessarily separated. The tradition evolved naturally. Special operations teams began presenting rifles to their supporting aviators, not for use but as symbols of trust. Pilots responded by sharing their terrain maps, their weather patterns, their accumulated knowledge of the battle space. The integration became seamless, organic, driven by respect rather than regulation. Young officers grew up in this new environment, never knowing the rigid separations that had once defined military culture. They saw female Apache pilots leading strike packages, male nurses making tactical decisions, support personnel contributing to mission planning. What had once been revolutionary became routine, the exception becoming the standard. Reeves watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that sustainable change came not from individual heroics but from systematic evolution. Every young officer who didn't have to fight for recognition, every mission that succeeded because of true integration, every life saved because barriers had fallen, these were her real victories. Years turned to decades. Reeves, long retired, was invited back for the dedication of the Nightingale Training Center, a joint facility where aviators and operators trained together from day one. The building's architecture itself defied traditional military separation, with flight simulators adjacent to shoot houses, medical training integrated with tactical planning. Rodriguez, also retired, met her at the entrance. His hair was gray now, his stride slower, but his bearing remained that of a warrior. "They got it right," he said, gesturing at young troops moving seamlessly between aviation and ground training. "No more stovepipes, no more just anything. They're all warriors, just with different tools." Reeves nodded, watching a female pilot brief a team of rangers on infiltration routes, while a special forces medic provided feedback on casualty evacuation procedures. This was the future she'd glimpsed that day in Afghanistan, when necessity had shattered convention. The keynote speech was supposed to be about the past, about that day when a medevac pilot had become a legend, but Reeves spoke about the future instead. "Every generation thinks they've broken all the barriers," she said, addressing the crowd of young faces. "But barriers are insidious. They rebuild themselves in new forms, create new categories of just and only. Your job is to remain vigilant, to question every assumption, to ask yourself whether you're seeing people's full capability or just what fits your preconceptions." She paused, remembering the dismissive looks in that tactical operations center years ago. "The next Nightingale might be your motor pool sergeant who understands logistics better than any planner, or your intelligence analyst who sees patterns everyone else misses, or your cook who grew up hunting and can shoot better than your snipers. Don't wait for combat to reveal these capabilities. Find them, develop them, integrate them now." The question came from a young warrant officer, female aviation branch. "Ma'am, what if they still don't listen? What if they still see us as just support?" Reeves smiled, the same smile she'd worn flying into that Afghan compound. "Then you be so good they can't ignore you. You study harder, train longer, and prepare for the moment when they'll need what only you can provide. And when that moment comes, because it always does, you execute without hesitation. You don't do it for recognition or revenge. You do it because Americans need you. The rest will sort itself out." The room erupted in applause, but Reeves barely heard it. She was looking at that young warrant officer, seeing herself decades ago, knowing that the cycle would continue. Battles would be fought, barriers would fall, and someone would always step forward when needed, regardless of what their nameplate said they were supposed to be. The final frame of the documentary footage, declassified after 20 years, showed the moment that defined everything. Rodriguez, blood on his hands from treating wounded teammates, passing his rifle upward. Reeves, one hand on the helicopter controls, reaching down to take it. Two warriors, separated by service culture but united by necessity, bridging decades of institutional blindness in a single gesture. The camera was shaky, the audio distorted by rotor noise and gunfire, but the image was clear. This was what right looked like. Not the dramatic shot that followed, not the heroic flying that preceded it, but this moment of absolute trust between professionals who saw each other's true capability. The freeze frame became iconic, printed on motivational posters in team rooms and flight briefings around the world. But for those who were there, who lived it, the image was unnecessary. They carried the moment in their bones, in the way they trained their successors, in the stories they told when young troops doubted their worth. Rodriguez kept a photo on his desk until the day he died, Not of the rifle exchange, not of the medal ceremony, but of Reeves teaching a class to special operations candidates. She was pointing at a topographical map, explaining how terrain could be used for tactical advantage, and every operator in the room was taking notes. That, he often said, was the real victory. Not the lives saved that one day, but the lives that would be saved by operators who learned to listen, aviators who learned to fight, and a military that learned to see capability wherever it existed. The inscription on the photo in Reeves's handwriting read simply, "To Ghost 7, who reminded me that respect is earned in both directions." It was, Rodriguez knew, the deepest truth of combat. Everyone brought something essential to the fight, but only those willing to see past labels and limitations could access the full spectrum of American military power. The epilogue wrote itself in small victories. A female crew chief who became the first to complete sniper school, a special operations medic who earned his pilot's wings, integration that went from forced to natural, from revolutionary to routine. The Barrett rifle in the museum gathered dust, but its lesson spree.